Hi, I'm Mike McDonald. I'm Public Works Director for the City of Leavenworth, and we're here today to talk a little bit about City Hall. The building behind me is a City Hall building. It was built in 1924. It is at least the second building on this particular site. There are pictures inside the building of the original City Hall showing that it occupied basically out to the sidewalk area, similar to many of the other older buildings downtown. This building was designed by Fifth and Seneca architects after a bond issue was passed by the citizens of the community to fund a new city hall. There are pictures of that information inside the building as well. The Fifth and Seneca are their own historical part of Leavenworth. They are, I believe, a distributed state historical site. They've done buildings of this type throughout this part of the state and the region. The county courthouse was also designed by Fifth and Seneca, which was father and son architects. This building, City Hall, is constructed of modern materials for the time and still modern materials today. The exterior is terracotta, which is a clay brick with the outside being impregnated with a harder, more decorative stone. Each block is built individually, although there are many that are the same shape. The vast majority appear to be a custom brick. The roof slab and the floor slabs are all concrete. It is not a wood construction building, which was pretty far forward architecting at the time. Another interesting design feature for the building is there's a sewer line that runs down the alley, headed from west to east, runs underneath the building here at City Hall, and exits on the east side and keeps on going to 4th Street. That is its own unique set of challenges operating the building, but we seem to have effectively addressed them all. But it is an interesting part if you like interesting design challenges. The city has been working over a series of projects over many years to address moisture in the building. A lot of it comes through the terracotta in that it was not properly sealed for many decades, and as a consequence the water absorbs into the bricks and it also deteriorates the mortar. Then the water finds its way into the concrete floor slabs and ends up destroying ceiling tiles and dropping them on people's desks, or occasionally you get weird water spots showing up even if the ceiling tile doesn't fall. So we've got another project getting ready to start, generally focusing on the exterior of the building for ceiling, but also a detailed masonry work above the roof line. If you look at the building, it says there's some writing at the top that says municipal building. All of that height is above the concrete roof slab, and it needs to be worked on from both the front and the back sides. One of the other interesting projects we recently completed was a reconstruction of the parking lot on the west side of City Hall. This parking lot has a rather interesting history. Firstly, this row here used to be similar to the other brick buildings. There was a series of foundations of the old buildings that were here originally. They extended back halfway into the lot. So we had a series of dips and sags in the parking lot, because when those buildings were demolished to make way for the parking lot at some point in the past, we're not sure exactly when, the material was just dumped into the buildings and it's differentially settled. But the most interesting part of the history was we were researching the old maps called the Sanborn Maps. They were originally prepared by the Sanborn Fire Protection Company to essentially identify who had paid for fire protection and who had not. Very detailed records of what was on the properties from about the 1870s and 80s up into the 1920s. And I did not know this at the time, but I learned that the jail was back in the back corner. If you look back to the west, it's on the left side, was the Leavenworth City Jail. and they had a pretty substantial building. We found evidence of that foundation while we were working on this project. And a sign of a different time, if you will, was on the north side of the lot adjacent to the jail was a fenced-in area. It was called the Stonebreaker's Yard. You can only imagine that the name meant what it said. I'm guessing they made crushed stone for municipal purposes during the day. Well, I am pretty sure that the oldest walls you see in this parking lot, there's brick and stone walls at the very back, that they date back to that time period. There was a row of sheds, I believe, that shows up on the Sanborn Maps, and I think that those walls are related to those sheds in that time period. We did not find any particularly interesting artifacts, a few broken glass bottles, and not complete enough to be really any real historical or cultural value. So we covered it back up, and then we paved it. As part of the paving project, what we did, our goal was to improve our water quality off parking lots. Parking lots are notorious for grease and oil and coffee and who knows what all gets dumped in the parking lots, and when it runs off, it runs into the rivers and streams and pollutes our waterway. So for several years, the city has been doing what we call bioswales, or a version of a bioswale. You see this dome structure here, and I'm sitting in a little depression. The theory is that the low runoff from small rainfall events carries most of the pollution. High rainfall events will overwhelm anything clever like a bioswale, but what we're really after is the pollution. So the water is directed to run into this little bioswale on this corner, and there's another one on the other corner, and the water does not run straight into an outlet. It runs into the soil, and it's a mixture of special soil and sand and charcoal to promote bacteria and microbiological growth. It degrades the contaminants. It collects the trash into a central area that can be cleaned up, and any of the grit and debris that is associated with stuff coming off cars is here. It's easy for the city to maintain it and protect the water quality. This lot was very difficult because it's so flat. Our goal was to get about 25 to 35% of the water in the parking lot to go to one of these two little bioswales. I think we were successful. If we had tried to get more, it would have been like driving on a lumpy mattress. It would have not been a pleasant experience. We're very proud of this. You'll see these throughout the community on some of our other parking lots and other projects. I'm standing in what is known as the light court. When the building was originally constructed, this was open to the sky. There's now a skylight over this area, and it's used as part of the internal pathways for people in the building. However, when it was built, it served a very different purpose. If you look on the wall, you'll see all of these windows that go to the interior spaces. Those windows are placed so that the light that comes in from the overhead open to the sky light court would then shine through these windows and would provide light into the restrooms. It would provide light. The lower windows here are a stairway going down to the basement, provided light into that area. And then the big windows here go into the main entryway and provided light into that area as well. Most of the glass here that has the patterns on it is the original glass from the 1924 buildings. I don't recall that we replaced any glass. You'll notice that the wall on this side is very different. This wall had been modified so severely and was structurally compromised that we were unable to restore it to its 1924 configuration. The historic office allowed us to change gears a little bit, and we made it into what you see now, where it's open on the second floor and you can look down into the light court and see how the rest of the building was constructed. Some other things in here that are worth noting In the 1970s, that remodeling, you'll see a line of concrete about 10, 12 feet high off the floor. That was where they added floor joists and a concrete deck. And in fact, on the second floor, that was where the community development offices were in that really narrow, confined area. It was really awkward. I could never figure out why it was like that until we did this project and removed that flooring, and you could see how it was constructed. If you know where to look, you'll see there was a door over here that allowed you to go into that space if you were on the second floor. One of the other fun things that we learned about was when they built the light court in the 1924s, the floor that I'm standing on was never intended to be a walkway or a floor for people to access every day. It was sloped to a series of drains, so all the water that would come down would go into the drains and be carried away. And we thought we could fix that, but it was too dramatic, too many problems. So about the first thing we had to do was had to cut out this entire floor where I'm standing and rebuild it to be flat enough to put down this nice reflective tile. So for a few weeks at some point, you could look down into the basement, see all the little things that were in the basement in here. It was very interesting. Another thing that people find absolutely fascinating is the fire department occupied originally and for many, many years, basically this portion of the building. The firefighters slept on the second floor, and when we were doing the building renovation, we found a big patch in the second floor, about that big around, which is where the fire pole was, and that the firemen would, if there was an alarm, they would come out and slide down the pole to the floor that we're on and get in their trucks and go out and take care of their business. And subsequently, as we were working in what is now the commission room, we found a patch in the floor in there where the base of the pole was fastened to the floor in the commission room. So interesting, the way things were done differently back in those days. Likewise, there's a couple of jail cells, or kind of the Barney Fife thing where they got the cage in the middle of the room. There were some of those upstairs where the finance office is. If you feel carefully with your feet as you walk through there, you'll feel a little bit of a rise because it was all reinforced concrete through there, and we couldn't take it any lower without creating other problems. So it's pretty subtle, but it's there. And another interesting aspect is on the north side of the building are some small windows up very high. Those were the higher security jail cells. They originally had bars on them. You can look closely at the window sills and see where the bars were. That was where the higher security residents, I guess, were kept. So lots of really interesting little stories about the building. We tried to do a job that would reflect its 1924 heritage and allow the technology that we had 20 years ago to flourish, as well as provide flexibility to allow us to do today. The biggest thing that's changed in that area was we pre-wired all over the place with the local area network cables. We're doing all wireless now, so that time has kind of come and gone for the most part. So it's times change. We try to change with them and keep this building, which will be 100 years old in 3 years. One of the biggest dramatic projects we worked on in my 32 years in Leavenworth was the rehabilitation of City Hall. It had last been a major rehab in 1972, and I suppose it was fine for the time, but a lot of the things that were done in the 70s were not working well for the 90s. And after the police and fire departments moved out when the Justice Center was built, we embarked on a fairly ambitious project to rework City Hall back to something resembling what it might have been when it was built in 1924, and to make it functional for today as well as into the future. Our goal of the project, among others, was we wanted the main corridors and hallways to look like they would have looked in 1924, and I think we were successful for that. We've kept the terrazzo floor. It's hard rock floor with colored rocks, plain smooth. You can see that throughout the first and second floor of the building. And then we have the grand staircase, which you see when you come in the main doorway on the west side, and you go up. And the large window is the light court. The stairway, as it was originally constructed, only went up about this tall. That's the way they built them back then. But it created problems, and today it doesn't meet code. So one of the more interesting things that the contractor had to do was disassemble the handrail. This is the original wooden handrail. We made an extension to add on to the top of the original work, and we put a secondary handrail in there to meet the code requirements and still keep the original wooden handrail. That was fairly complicated. I think they did an excellent job of that. The other thing we did, we took out stuff from the 70s. They had lowered all the ceilings. This was the energy conservation thing that you did back then, so it was all drop ceilings with the ceiling tiles and little grids. We raised the ceilings back up as high as we possibly could and put the new sheetrock ceilings throughout most of the building. We established the look of the original windows with the starbursts you'll see on the outside of the building, and we wanted to expose all of those to actually let the light come in like it was intended to back in the day, because in the 1920s they didn't necessarily have electricity everywhere, and they depended a lot on natural light to light the interior spaces. I want to talk a little bit about our Statue of Liberty project that we have coming up. This project is included in the recent award of project here at City Hall to work on the building. We added in the Statue of Liberty base. Statue of Liberty, this was I forget exactly when, but these statues were provided, had the opportunity to be in almost every community in the country back in, I think it was the 50s or the 60s. This one has been here for a long time. However, the base has a history of deteriorating. If you look at this, you can see that the stone is crumbling. We want to replace it with a properly designed stone base. The previous base was replaced in early 2000s, I think. It had similar problems, and it really relates to while the contractors did what we asked them to do, I think the project was not designed by people that fully understood how masonry structures work in an environment where you've got constant water and fire behind it. It's a stone absorbs the water, and it freezes and thaws. This piece just popped off in the last day or two, just laying out here, fits here. So we're excited to bring the statue back up to spec. It's going to look sharp with the outside of the building. If you've ever wondered the shape of the base, it's some odd-shaped star. I believe it is based on the Statue of Liberty as it's built in New York in the harbor, where the statue itself is built in the inside of a giant Army coastal defense fort, and that outline is the shape of the fort that the Statue of Liberty is actually built in New York City. This project should be done in the summer of this year.